Slide 8 from that lecture, which we did not go over in class. We were doing a lot of amino acid flashcards that day and only did several of the additional slides from lecture 8. So these are two of the derivatives that can be made from amino acids. Our body makes other things out of the amino acids. And one of them, the lower one, is thyroxine, a hormone that I'm going to talk about. You see it looks like tyrosine. In red is the tyrosine portion of it. It's a side chain. It's amino acid, tyrosine, including the black and red parts there. And then some iodines added to it. Plus a second tyrosine ring with the hydroxyl group. And additional iodines. That's one of the hormones. And it's made in our and it occurs in our thyroid glands. You can see that from its name, thyro. It's made in our thyroid glands. Histamine is another chemical that's made. It sounds a lot like histidine, the amino acid histidine, and it's histidine minus a carboxyl group. The backbone there, the black portion, is missing the carboxyl head. Otherwise, it's the histidine amino acid. Now let's just have a few brief comments on these. I'm having some problems this morning. I don't know why. Well, let me try this. I'm having trouble with two different computers, both the real computer and mine. All right, now your thyroid gland is in your neck, around your windpipe there. And this hormone exists there in the thyroid gland, the thyroxine, the one that's made out of tyrosines. It is used, when people work in a laboratory, in many of our biochemistry laboratories, radioactive iodine is used as a tracer to monitor some of the proteins and other chemicals being studied. And radioactive iodine, if you were to inhale it, would concentrate itself in your area in your thyroid gland. So people are supposed to work with the chemicals in a hood so that the iodine will then, get diluted and blasted out into the atmosphere. If it is in the gas form, it's volatile. Solid iodine is volatile. And that way the laboratory technician would not be inhaling it. But if they make mistakes, if they don't work carefully, and they inhale the radioactive iodine, it'll get concentrated in the thyroid gland. And so people working with it are routinely monitored by sort of holding a scintillation counter up to their neck. One of the technicians in a laboratory in the biology department some time ago, 10, 15 years ago, they found that her neck was radioactive. And so she had to stop working with it. She was forbidden to do any experiments with it. And that laboratory was put on warning that if another person in their lab had that happen, then they'd not be allowed to use the isotope anymore. So this is just a little bit of a side story on this. Let's see if I can then show you a little bit about the histamine. Now that histamine is made in your cells from histidine by just cutting off the carboxyl group. The enzyme which does that is histidine decarboxylase. And those are inside cells that line your nasal passages, your sinus. When a virus, like the cold virus, infects your nasal areas, it will destroy some of those cells, and that will release histidine to the fluid in your nose. So it's released when cells are destroyed by the virus. Now that histidine then binds to receptors on other cells in the nose, and those receptors bind that and then cause cells to release fluid. Part of the idea is that the fluid might then help rinse that virus out of your nose. You might be able to get rid of it or dilute it down that way. So these other cells that are stimulated then by the histidine excrete this mucus in your bronchial system and your nasal system. I don't, my colds, I try to keep them from getting into my chest. If I get them into my chest, then I'm worse off for weeks and weeks in the winter time. So if I can, I try to stop all that drainage down into my throat and drainage down into the lungs, because then I get something worse. So I take a medicine, like many people do, that has what's called an antihistamine. It's just one way of treating these symptoms. It doesn't kill the virus, but it's a way of treating the symptoms, and then it binds competitively to those receptors. The antihistamine and histamine would go to the same receptors, so if the antihistamine binds there, then histamine cannot, and then the nasal system does not produce all this mucus. Well, this is one of the ones I take. It is Alka-Seltzer Plus. It has in it an antihistamine. It's for treating runny noses. And that's one of the things it does, is just prevent this mucus from forming. So I share that with you as a brief, both of those little stories as brief stories with a medical connection.